You would have heard about simple interest before. Anybody knows about simple interest? Anything about simple interest? Have you ever heard the term simple interest before? What does it mean?
I heard interest, but not simple interest.
Okay, what is interest? Do you know what interest is?
It's kind of like when you owe someone some money and like the longer you wait, the the higher the value.
Yeah, so interest is that specific amount of money that is added on to what you owe for what you owe if you borrow money, or like if you make an investment to what you earn, right? So the interest is the difference in the total amount that you're paying back and the actual amount that you borrowed. So y'all ever heard about simple interest before, like in Form 1 or primary school? Anybody? Simple interest. Hi, Sophia. Good evening.
Miss Alice brought up that. I don't know.
Sorry, honey, can you repeat that?
I don't know, miss. I hear the word
Okay.
interesting. I feel like I know it, but I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Well, let me give you all a little refresh, right? Simple interest has to do with, okay, so Zara gave us the example of interest being like when you borrow something and when you have to pay it back, the longer you wait to repay, the more money accumulates, right? So for example, well, simple interest, just to refresh your memory, and maybe when I write it down, it might ring a bell. But simple interest is calculated by multiplying the principal by the rate by the time all over 100, right? So let's say you
Yes, I know
borrow.
what that is, miss.
You never see this before? All
No,
right.
miss, but you see that before. I know what that is.
All right. Well, before we get to compound interest, we will look at simple interest first, right? So simple interest, um, you have, well, interest, first of all, is the payment or fee made to a bank for the use of money that you borrow, right? So the when you borrow money, and most times the bank does not use simple interest, the bank uses compound interest, but we'll get there in a sec. In terms of simple interest, let's say you borrow $10,000 at the end, and you have like 3 years to pay it back. At the end of the 3 years, you're not going to just be paying back $10,000. You're actually going to be paying back 10,000 plus some amount in interest. So you'll have to pay back more money than you actually borrowed, right? So that's the whole concept of interest. The principal is the initial amount of money, right? So the initial amount of money, whether it's borrowed or invested. And I want you all to write these things down, right? So the initial amount of money borrowed or invested is your principal balance. That's what principal is. All right. And then the rate, well, the rate is um you have interest rate that is applied to the amount of money and to the period that you borrowed for, right? So the interest rate, this is the rate at which interest is calculated. So it's a percentage, right? The percentage at which the interest is calculated. And we'll look at that in a short while. When we use an example, all of this would make a little more sense. Just giving you a few definitions to begin. Forgot how to spell calculated. Right. I think that's it. You know, like sometimes when you write a word and it just looks really weird, that's how calculated is looking to me right now.
Yeah.
Like I didn't, yeah, like I didn't spell it correct. I don't know if I did because now I'm confused. I think I spelled it correct.
Yeah, it's supposed to right.
Okay. Right. So the rate is the percentage at which the interest is calculated. The time is the number of years. All right. So the amount of time in years. Okay. So time is the number of years that for which the loan is or the investment is taken, right? So the number of years. Time is calculated in years. So in this formula, even if the interest is, even if you're borrowing it for like 6 months, you'd have to convert that to years, which is a half, right? So principal, rate, time, and then you have, well, SI stands for simple interest, right? There are two types of interest. You have simple interest. Well, for the purpose of this, you have simple interest, and you have the compound interest. But to begin, since you're not sure what simple interest is, I'm gonna go through that first and then we'll get to compound interest. So the abbreviation SI stands for simple interest, right? So all of this was just like the abbreviations that I'm putting here. So first you have P represents principal, R is rate, T is time, and then SI means simple interest. So simple interest is the amount of money that you're going to be repaying on top of the principal or added to the principal. And then finally, amount, A. A stands for amount. And amount would include, that's the total amount of money, right? So the total amount of money repaid. Total amount of money to be repaid. So that would include your principal plus your simple interest. And like I said, all of this is going to make more sense as we do some examples. So this what I wrote up here, this is the formula for simple interest. Okay, to calculate the simple interest is calculated as a percentage per year of the loan. All right, so simple interest, to calculate it, we do principal times rate times time all over 100. And let's look at how do we apply this formula. All right, so we're gonna write a question and then we're gonna apply the formula so I could show you how we calculate simple interest. So the example, find A, the interest, and then B, the total amount or the total repayment on a loan of $10,000. So you're borrowing $10,000 for 3 years. So you have 3 years to pay it back. If the rate of interest is 16% per annum. So that this term per annum, it means per year. Okay, so it's 16% per year. So first thing that we need to, let me actually make a little note of that. Per annum, this means per year. So whenever you see that, that's what it means, right? Per annum means per year. So before we can actually calculate the simple interest, we need to identify the principal, the rate, and the time. All right. So principal, because remember, let's recall that the formula to calculate simple interest is principal by rate by time all over 100. So let's identify what's the principal. The principal, guys, is the amount of money you're borrowing. So in this case, $10,000 is your principal. The amount of time you're borrowing it for is 3 years. So this is your time. And then the rate is 16%. This is your rate. So what we do now is we substitute these values into the formula. All right, so for part A, we need to find the interest. So we'll do simple interest is equal to principal, which is 10,000 multiplied by the rate, which is 16%, multiplied by the time, which is 3. All of that over 100. You type that in on your calculator. right? Or you could work it out manually if you wish. These two zeros will cancel. And you'll get 100 times 16 times 3, which is 4,800. So the amount of interest you have to pay back on this loan of $10,000 is 4,800, right? So then part B is asking us to find out the total repayment. So your total repayment is the total amount that you have to pay back, right? So total repayment, which is also known as the amount, is equal to your principal, whatever is the initial amount of money that you borrowed, plus the interest that you calculated. All right. So that would be 10,000, that's the principal, plus $4,800. And the total that you would have to pay back will therefore be 14,800. So if you borrow $10,000 for 3 years at an interest rate of 16% per annum, it means that after when you're repaying, you're not just going to be paying back. You're not just going to be paying back $10,000. You're actually going to be paying back $14,800. So this is how interest works, right? Interest is when you have to pay more than you actually borrowed. And the formula to calculate interest is principal times rate times time. Another way that you could have calculated it, I mean, it's the same, it really is the same thing that you're doing, but you could like break up the formula a little bit. So what you can do is you could just find what is 16%, so 16 over 100 of 10,000, right? And that would have given you 1,600, right? So this will be the interest in 1 year. So if you know what the interest in 1 year is equal to, then you can find the interest in 3 years by multiplying this by 3. So interest in 3 years will be equal to 1,600 times 3. Either way, you're still going to get the same 4,800, right? It's just that this is just breaking up the formula into two parts, into finding first the interest in 1 year and then calculating the interest in 3 years. Because if you know the value of 1, you can find the value of any amount by multiplying, right? So if you know that the interest after 1 year, the interest that would accumulate on the loan is $1,600, then in 3 years, it will be $1,600 times 3. So this is the same thing that we just did here, except I broke up the formula into two parts. So let's do another example. All right, so let's say I want to find the simple interest on a loan of, so find the simple interest on a loan of, so you're going to do like different ones, right? So let's say we have $800. So that's your principal for 4.5 years at 6%. All right. So guys, if I have to find the simple interest on a loan of $800 for 4.5 years at 6%, remember the formula for simple interest is principal times rate times time all over 100. So this would be equal to 800, because that's your principal, times the rate, which is 6%, times 4.5 years. And all of that, you're going to divide it by 100. So I think you all have calculators. You could type this in directly in your calculator. 800 times 6 times 4.5 or 4.5, however you want to type it, and then divide that by 100. and you're going to end up with $216. So the simple interest on a loan of $800 for 4.5 years at 6% will be $216. All right. Now, if I had to find the simple interest on a loan of, let's say, $1,200, right, for 6 months, at 10%, to calculate this one, now you see that the time here is given in months, right? But our simple interest formula is the time in the formula is given in years. So you would have to change 6 months to years. All right. So you'd have to write that either as a fraction or as a decimal. So 6 months is half of a year, right? That's 6/12. So therefore, the simple interest here in the formula, I would put 1,200 multiplied by a half or by 0.5 times 10%. Let me write this over with 10 first because we do interest first. It doesn't matter though because it's multiplication and multiplication is commutative, which means that order does not matter. So this would give me 1,200 times 10% times 0.5 divided by 100, which is $60. So the interest on this loan of 1,200 for 6 months at 10% will be $60. All right, guys. So at this point, I am going to write down some, and I want you all to do it for me. I would like you to write out your formula like this, and then write your answer out like exactly as it is written here. Okay. So I'm gonna write them down here, and then and please, I want to see it on WhatsApp. So the first one, I'll leave it on the screen actually, so that you can watch the way it's written. Remember, if the time, sorry, is given in months, you have to change it to years because the formula, T in the formula is time calculated in years. All right, so you're doing for me, $600, 600 for 2 years at 7%. Then you're doing $8,000 for 4 years at 5%. You're gonna look at 4,300 taken for 3 years at 12.5%. And then finally, you're looking at 1,800 for 6 months at 10%. Oh no, I did 6 months at 10% already. Let me change this. Let's do 14 months at 10%. Yeah. So please try these for me and send it to me on WhatsApp so I can see your weekend. So part C is simple interest will be, it was 600 for 2 years at 7%. So that would be 600 times 7% times 2 years all over 100. So that would give me 600 times 7 times 2 is 8,400, and that divided by 100 is $84. So the simple interest here will be $84. Part D, it was 8,000 for 4 years at 5%. So 8,000 times 4 years at 5%. So times 5 times 4 all over 1,000. Like I said, it doesn't matter if you write how you write the top because, oh shucks, why did I put over 1,000? Over 100, right? Because it's multiplication, right? So
Yes, it is
8,000,
80, so it's 80,000.
what's that, honey?
And this 80,000 is that's you put on the thing.
No, 8,000, 8,000.
Oh, that is something very wrong.
So 8,000 times 5 times 4 is 160,000, and that divided by 100 is 1,600, right? And then part E, we have 4,300 times 3 years at 12.5% interest. So 12.5, all of that over 100. On your calculators, you'll do 4,300 times 3 times 12.5. You'll get 161,250. And when you divide that by 100, you're going to end up with $1,612.50. And then the final one, part F, it is $1,800. That's your principal, right? Multiply by 14 months. So guys, to change 14 months to years, it'll be 14 over 12, right? Multiply by 10%. Now, I realized that some of you changed 14 over 12 to a decimal. But if you're changing it to a decimal, right, 14 over 12, which is 1 and 1/6, as a decimal, that would be 1.1666 and so on, right? If you're rounding this off to 2 decimal places, this will be 1.17. All right, not 1.16, because 2 decimal places, this is a 6 here, so you'll have to add 1 to the 6. So it'll be 1.17, right? And that would slightly change the answer. So my suggestion to get the most accurate answer is not to round it off to a decimal, is to just leave it as a fraction as 14 over 12, right? So do 1,800 times 14 over 12 times 10. You'll get 21,000, and that divided by 100 is $210. All right, so that's my suggestion. Leave it as a fraction. 210. Now I gave you a corrector, but really and truly, if you round it off to 2 decimal places, it would have been 1.17. So it would be 1,800 times 1.17 times 10, and then that would give you 1,800 times 1.17 times 10 divided by 100. You'll get this. You'll still get $210, but $210.60, which is close enough, right? So if you're rounding off to 2 decimal places, be sure to round up if the digits in the third decimal place is 5 or more. All right, let's look at if you have the so this is how you calculate the simple interest, right? And if I wanted to find out the total amount for each of them, I will simply add the interest to the principal, right? So adding the interest to the principal will give me like the first one, part C, adding the interest to the principal will be $684, right? So that would be total amount that you will be paying back, right? That'll be total amount that you're paying back. So 684, this one will be 8,000 plus 1,600, which is 9,600. The total amount here will be 1,612.50 plus 4,300, which will be 5,912.50. And then the last one here, 1,800 plus 210 will be $2,010, right? So that will be the total amount that you have to repay. Now, with simple interest, using the same formula, like if you have the simple interest, the rate, and the principal, for instance, you could calculate the number of the number of years, sorry, or the amount of time that it took for a loan. So you could calculate the rate, principal, or time, right, by rearranging the formula. So for instance, if I have so you'll rearrange your formula, okay? So let's look at the formula. So simple interest is equal to principal times rate times time, all divided by 100. So if I had to find the principal, right, I would rearrange this formula. So to rearrange this formula to make P the subject, I would first multiply throughout by 100. So I'll have simple interest times 100, and then I will divide all of that by the rate multiplied by the time. So that's how you make P, principal, the subject of the formula. All right. So if you have the simple interest and you have the rates and the time, you can calculate the principal. Likewise, if I wanted to calculate the rates, same, it's literally the same rearrangement, right? So it will be simple interest multiplied by 100 divided by principal times time. If I wanted to calculate the time, then it would be simple interest multiplied by 100 divided by principal times rate. So you may be asked to calculate the principal given the simple interest, the rate, and the time. Or you might be asked to calculate the rate when given the principal and the time. Or you can be asked to find the time when given the principal and the rate. So the beautiful thing about math, this is algebra, and it's changing the subject of the formula, which we've done before. So changing the subject of the formula, it just means that I want to make in this one, if I have to make P the subject, I have to move all the terms, all the other terms, such as rate, time, and 100 to the other side of the equation. And when you move something from one side of the equation to the other side, you do the opposite of the operation. Okay, so this is, and I think it's really simple because it really is just, you just interchange, right? So if it's principal, it would be simple interest times 100 divided by the other two, the products of the rate and the time. If it's rate, it's simple interest times 100 divided by product times time. And if it's time, it's simple interest times 100 divided by principal by rate. So let's put that to the test, right? So let's say that I want to find P. Right, so let's say I want to, so as an example, find the principal, find P given that the simple interest is equal to $90. The rate is 9%, and the time is 4 years. If I need to find P, well, then I'll be using this formula here. P is equal to simple interest times 100 divided by rate times time. So therefore, P is equal to simple interest, which is 90, times 100 divided by the rate, which is 9, times the time, which is 4. So that would be 90 times 100 is 9,000, right? So that's 9,000 divided by 9 times 4 is 36. So 9,000 divided by 36, which will give me $250. All right. So therefore, the principal is $250. And if you want to check to see if your answer is correct, well, check in to see if my answer is correct. Let's see. Let's see if I calculate the simple interest on a principal of 250 at 9% for 4 years. Let's see if I get back $90, right? So check in, simple interest is equal to principal. In this case, we just got 250. So that will be 250, that's the principal, times the rate, which is 9%, times the time, which is 4, all divided by 100. Let's see if I get $90. Well, 250 times 9 times 4 is, sorry, I meant to say, let's see if I get $90. I think I said 50 by accident. But anyway, 250 times 9 times 4 is 9,000. And 9,000 divided by 100 is actually 90. So you see how it works out? So this is how you manipulate the formula to make any of the other ones the subject, right? So let's say I needed to find the time taken for a loan instead of the principal. So let's say I needed to find, the time. So find t given that the interest is equal to $225, the principal is equal to $750, and then the rate is equal to 10%. So I have the interest, the principal, and the rate, and I need to find the time. Well, putting that together, I would need to use the formula where t is the subject. So t is equal to simple interest times 100. So 225 times 100 divided by the principal, which is 750, times the rate, which is 10. Okay, so that gives me 225 times 100 is 22,500, 22,500. And all of that is to be divided by 750 times 10, which is 7,500. So 22,500 divided by 7,500 is equal to 3 years. So the time that it takes for the principal, $750, to accumulate an interest of $225 at a rate of 10% is 3 years. And again, to check my answer, I can substitute these values. So I'm going to substitute 750 principal times rate, 10%, times time, 3 years, the all divided by 100 to see if I get back 225. Right? So that would be principal is 750, right? Multiply by the rate, which is 10%, multiply by the time that we just calculated, which is 3 years. And all of that is to be divided by 100. So let's see. These two zeros could cancel. 75 times 3 is 225. So my answer is correct. So you can use the formula, you can manipulate the formula to make any one of those values the subject. Guys, we're going to stop here and take a short break. Now, banks and other financial institutions don't usually use simple interest. I wish they did, because then we would pay way less when we take a loan. But they use compound interest instead, right? So the difference between simple interest and compound interest is that with simple interest, the principal is just the initial amount of money that you borrowed. And you just, to calculate the total interest that you will be repaying, you multiply the rate by the interest rate by the initial amount that you borrowed, your initial principal, and multiply it by the number of years that you took, right? But with compound interest, the principal changes at the end of every year because you get a new principal balance by adding the interest each year. So the interest that accumulated on the amount of money at the end of year one will now be added to the principal, and that would be the new principal for year two. So let's see how that looks, right? So let's say I had to find the compound interest. So compound, the word compound, it means on top of. It means it's accumulating on top of it each time, right? So compound interest is better than simple interest for investments because then you'll get more money when you invest the same value over the same period of years, you'll get more money, right? But actually, you'll get more as the years accumulate. So as you get more years, your interest is gonna be so much more. It's gonna be increasing each year because the principal will be increasing, right? So compound interest in the long term is much better than simple interest for investments. For loans, it's bad because then you're gonna have to be paying back so much, right? So find the compound interest. Find the compound interest on a loan of on a loan of let's say $600. So that's your principal, $600 for 2 years at 12% per annum. Remember, per annum means per year. All right. So, like I said, for year one, your principal, so this is for year one. Year one, right? The interest will be 12% of $600, which is actually equal to $72. So the interest that accumulates, the interest that you would earn on $600, or the interest that accumulates on the $600, the principal of $600 is $72, right? Now the principal after the first year, principal after the first year, after year one, is equal to your initial amount, 600 plus 72. So your new principal is equal to $672, right? Now for year two, the interest will now be calculated on this $672. So now it's the same interest rate though, so it's still 12%, but the principal will now be the amount that you had after year one, which is 672. So you're going to be calculating 12% of 672. So 12 over 100 times 672 is $80.64. So at the end of year two, the interest is $80.64. So the total amount of money, right? The total amount to be repaid, total amount will be equal to 672 plus $80.64, which is equal to $752.64. Right? So this is the difference between compound interest and simple interest, is that the principal is not the same. With simple interest, it's the same principal. So with simple interest, if I needed to calculate the simple interest of $600 for 2 years at 12% per annum, I would simply substitute these values into the formula. Simple interest is equal to principal by rate by time, right? Which would actually give me, let's see, 600 times 12 times 2 which would actually be $144. That will be your interest. So after 2 years, you would have to pay back $744, right? However, with compound interest, you would have to pay back $752.64. So here you can already see that compound interest is more than simple interest, right? Because the interest after each year is added to the principal balance. All right. So the total interest here, right? So you could have done this too. The total interest in this case, right, would have been the first 72 and then the $80.64. So that's 72 plus $80.64. So the total interest here would be I see $152.64. So you could have done this, right? $152.64. And then you just add that back to 600, and that would have given you the total amount here as well, right? But that's the difference between compound interest and simple interest. The difference is that compound interest is calculated at the end. The principal is a new balance at the end of each year. Right, so that's the difference. And as the years increase, you're gonna have more and more and more interest. Okay, so let's see. There is a formula for compound interest, but if you can't remember the formula, you can just work it out like this, right? Like by finding the interest each year. So I'm gonna look at one more and then I'll show you the formula as well, right? So let's say we are looking at $30,000, 30,000 at an interest rate of 8% per annum. So the principal is 30,000, the rate is 8%, and the time is 3 years. Right? So the time is 3 years. And I kind of like to calculate it I like to write it in a table because I find putting it in a table makes it easier to see. So let me show you how I would construct a table for this. I would put principal. Actually, no, I would start with year. So I would have year first. So this is year, and then I would have principal. I will have interest and then amount. So the total amount. All right. And then let me construct a table here. So I'll this is my first row. Well, my header would be year principal interest. Yeah, principal interest amount. Right. Good. So for year one, if I'm looking at a principal of 30,000, so in year one, that's my first year. So in year one, the principal is 30,000, right? The interest will be 30,000 multiplied by 8%, which will give me, let's see, 30,000 times 8 over 100 is 2,400. So at the end of the first year, the interest will be 2,400. So the total amount will be 30,000, the original principal, plus 2,400. And that gives me $32,400. So at the end of year one, the new principal will be 32,400. So that means at the beginning of year two, that's the principal value that we will be calculating. We're going to be looking at the principal of 32,400. So that's my new principal. So I write that here, 32400, right? And I check what is Now 8% of this amount, so 3,000 to 32,400, sorry, times 8%, which is equal to 32400 times 0.08, which is the same as 8%, will be 2592. So the new amount at the end of year 2 will be 2592 plus 32,400. So 32,400 plus 2592 gives me 34,992. And now that is the new principal balance that I will be using as the principal to calculate my interest in year 3. Right? So year 3, like I said, I like to put it in a table because I find it's easy to interpret from a table. Right? So now, well, easier. So year 3, the new principal balance will be the ending balance after year 2, which is $34,992. So to calculate my interest, that would be 34,992 times 8%. And that gives me my total amount. Sorry, that interest will be 3,992 times 8 over 100. That's going to be $2,799.36. So at the end of year 3, the amount of money will now be, the total amount of money will be the original principal from the beginning of year 3, 34,992 plus 2,799.36. Which gives me $37,791.36. So this, my friends, is how you will calculate the total amount of money on a loan of 30,000 borrowed at a rate of 8% over 3 years. Okay, I'm not going to put this together. So the final answer here is $37,791.36. That's the total amount that you would have to repay on the loan, right? Now, if I was using simple interest, what I would have to do here is I would just have to do principal, 30,000 times rate, which is 8%, times time of 3 years to get the total amount of interest, or to get the total value, of the interest, right? And then I would just add that to the principal. So if we check that, let's see what that would look like. If I check what is 30,000 times 8%, 8 over 100, times 3 years, I'll get 7,200, right? So at the end of 3 years, the total amount of money that you will owe will be $37,200, right? So you see how it's less. Simple interest is always going to be less because it's calculated on only the original principal, right? There is also a formula for compound interest. So take a picture of this if you didn't finish writing it down, because I want you all to do exactly this whole thing. I want you to do one like this. I'm going to give you a question to do to calculate the total amount of compound calculated, the total amount of a value when you calculate that compound interest afterwards. So let me show you the formula, right? The formula is E for compound interest, right? So the compound interest formula. at this level, you're probably only going to get questions where it's compounded annually, right? So that means when I say compounded annually, I mean that the interest is calculated only once a year. But sometimes the interest can be calculated more than once a year. So it could be like quarterly. And if it's quarterly, you have 4 quarters, sorry, in a year. So you'll have four times that interest will be calculated, right? But for this, at this level, we're only going to be doing questions where interest is compounded annually, once annually. And for that, the formula is A is equal to principal. A is equal to principal multiplied by 1 plus the rate. So I'm writing rate as R over 100. All right, raised to the power of t, where A is the total amount, right? Total amount. P is your principal. R is your rates, your interest rates, and T is time in years. So it still is going to be time in years, just like with the simple interest formula. Now, you might see this in, like, if you just Google it, you'll end up seeing it as this. A is equal to P by 1 plus R to the power, R over N, sorry, to the power of N by T. Right? But you're not going to have to do it this way at this level because this N stands for the number of times that the principal is, that interest is compounded, right? So you don't need to know that at this point. You're going to use it just like this. This is how CXC brings it as well. So let's see if we get the same answer as this, if we just use the formula, right? So the principal again, I'm going to write it over. The principal was, P was 30,000. The rate was 8%. And the time was 3 years. So let's check if my answer is going to be the same as this, 37791.36. So keep that in mind, right? So putting that in the formula itself to calculate the total amount, it would be principal, 30,000, multiplied by 1 plus the rate, which is 8 over 100. Now, you could write that as a decimal instead. If you're writing this as a decimal, you would not need to write it as over 100, okay? So 30,000 multiplied by 1 plus 8 over 100 raised to the power of 3. All right, so on your calculators now, you would write 30,000 open brackets, 1 plus 8 over 100, close brackets, raised to the power of 3, and you'll end up with 37791.36. Was that what we got? Yep. So you see, you can use the formula or you can use this method here, right? Like I said, I put it in a table. You don't need to put it in a table. You could do it like this. I prefer to put it in a table because I think it's easy to follow in a table, right? Or you could use the formula. Now, I find this formula is a little more complicated, or not complicated, but a little more difficult to memorize than the simple interest one. And it's okay because most of the questions that you're going to get will be like 2 years or 3 years. So it's not too difficult to do it piece by piece like how we did it here, right? So once more, let me just check what's the total interest that was accumulated here. Now, if you use the formula, right, I could calculate the total interest that was earned or accumulated on the 30,000. I could just simply subtract, right? So the total interest here, the interest will be equal to the amount minus the principal. So the amount is $37,791.36 minus 30,000, because that's what the interest is. The interest is the difference in the value that you're paying and the value that you borrowed. So the total amount minus the principal, which in this case is $7,791.36. So that was the interest, the total interest on this principal of 30,000. Here I could also calculate it from the actual values that I got here. So like 2,400 plus 2,592 plus 2,799.36, right? So then the total interest here, total interest would be equal to 2,400 plus 2,592 plus $2,799.36. And I'm supposed to get $7,791.36. So let's see, 2,400 plus 2,592 plus 2,799.36. Yep, I got the same answer. Right, so I'm just showing you all the different ways, guys. Now, if you are asked to find the total interest, this is what they're asking you to calculate, right? The 7,791. So it means you still have to work it out completely and then add it all up, right? If they ask you to calculate the total amount paid, then you're looking for the total value that you have to pay back. So everything, the final principal plus the interest. All right. So just to recap, compound interest, is different to simple interest because you calculate the interest on the principal each year. So at the end of year one, the new principal balance will be the total amount that includes the principal plus the interest. And then at year two, the new principal will be the principal at the end of year one, right? Unlike simple interest, where it's just one principal value that you are calculating. All right. So, guys, I would like you now to do one for me, right? So you're doing compound interest. All right, so let me write it down. Find the compound interest. I want to see it too, so please send it to me. Find, and you can use the table if you want, or you can write it out, however you want to do it. It's fine. Just make sure it's clear, like you're working and steps are clear. So find the compound interest on 4,000 for 3 years at an interest rate of 15% per annum. All right, so I want you to do it, write it either in the table format or just like how we did it first. And I also want to see you apply this in a formula. So just recall that your formula is, the formula is total amount is equal to principal by 1 plus r over 100 raised to the power of t. So everybody, I would like you to work on this now, please. Solution here. All right, so again, for compound interest, you have to calculate the interest at the end of each year. Well, the interest using the new principal balance at the end of each year. Now, to begin, the principal will just be the initial amount, right? So I'm going to just draw up my table here. This is year one. This is the principal. And then we have the interest. So I'll make my column a little bigger for the interest and the amount at the end of the year. Right. Great. All right. So at the end of year one, hold on, I want to draw one more line. Okay. Okay. Right. So my first column, I'll have year, then I'll have principal, interest, and finally total amount. All right. So we starting with four. So in year one, the initial principal is what you're starting with. That's 4,000. And the interest will be 15% of 4,000. So 4,000 by 15%. You can either do 15% as 15 over 100, or you could do 0.15. Both will give you the same answer, which is 600. So the interest at the end, the interest that accumulates at the end of year one will be 600. So the total amount in the account will be 4,000 plus 600, which gives me 4,600. Right? So that's my first year completed. Now, with compound interest for year two, I will need to put the new principal will be the amount at the end of year one, which is 4,600. So my interest is going to be 4,600 times 15%. All right, so 4,600 times 15% is $690. So at the end of year two, you would now have 4,600 plus $690, which gives me a total of $5,290. So at the end of year two, in the account, I will have $5,290. So now we do year three. Year three, the principal will be the total amount at the end of year three, which is $5,290. So interest will be calculated on $5,290. So that would be 5,290 times 15%, which gives me $793.50. So this is the amount of interest at the end of year three. So the total amount of money that you will have at the end of year three will be 5,290 plus 793.50, which gives me $6,083.50. All right. So that is the amount of money that you would have to repay on a loan if it's on a loan of $4,000 for a period of 3 years, compounded at 15% per year. All right. And then the last thing, so this is the total amount of money here, right? This is the final answer here. Oops. Yeah, this is your final answer. So this is how much money you would have to repay. So if I wanted to find out what's the total interest, however, I can do total. Total interest here will be 600 plus 690 plus 793.50. And that gives me the grand total of $2,083.50. So that's how much money I would have had to repay in interest right? So two ways you could do it. You could just do 6083.50 minus 4,000. The difference in those two values gives you the total interest. Or you could add up all of these, this plus this plus this. All right. So that's one way to do it. Or you could have used the formula. Well, I actually asked you all to do it both ways in terms of doing it out in the table like this and then also using the formula. So let's use the formula. Let's substitute our values in the formula. So that would be total amount after 3 years will be principal, which is 4,000 multiplied by 1 plus the rate, that's 15 over 100, all raised to the power of 3. That's the time. So on your calculators, you do 4,000 open brackets 1 plus 15 over 100 raised to the power of 3, and you get $6,083.50. See? So all of this can be condensed into this formula. And then total interest will be amount minus principal, which is $6,083.50 minus 4,000, which gives me $2,083.50. So both methods will work, guys. Right? This method works all the time. Now, it makes sense. You can use the method like this table method or working it out piece by piece if it's like a short number of years, like anywhere between like 3 to 4 years. But if it was 10 years, this might get this will be a little bit too much, right? To do all of this. It'll be too much. So I would suggest learning how to use the formula, and most times it's going to be given to you anyway. So at least you would have it, so you don't have to memorize it. But if it's like a little bit of years, you could absolutely do it this way, and this way is fine. All right. So guys, we're going to stop there for today.